Let's move on to our two members of the Bundestag, Anna Christmann and Helge Lindh. Maybe let's start with Anna Christmann for a moment. She's a member of the Green Party parliamentary group, and she's also the spokesperson for civic engagement for the party. She sits on the committee as well, but she's also working on the Enquete Commission for the Bundestag. She's a member of the Enquete Commission for artificial intelligence. So maybe I want to ask the question, maybe sort of in a combination of the two roles you're representing here. If I look at the Enquete Commission, it's a very established and also very fascinating body where evidence is brought into the parliamentary debate. How do you place this approach, which the Bundestag has been using for a long time, towards this new approach where you're bringing in citizen participation, ordinary citizens, which bring in their perspective on a specific manner? Because in terms of evidence, in terms of knowledge, there's no lack, there's no shortage at the Bundestag, as far as I understand. You have the service, you have these enquete commissions, but what is lacking from your perspective? What could those citizen councils bring into politics? What is lacking today?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me tonight. And I think it's a great discussion. I also learned a lot already, and it's very inspiring to see the examples from the different countries. So thank you very much for the presentations. And I think it's not a lack of information we are talking about, and it's not a lack of expertise we have. It's a form of participation that everyone can get the chance to participate. And I think that is the difference from citizen assemblies to an enquete commission, that we don't have experts that the politics asks for, and we in an enquete commission we have like specific experts we invite to come to the commission and work with us, but it's not a form of deliberative process that is driven by the people, and I think that is a big difference. And I think it's very fascinating to talk with people who were part of citizen assemblies, and they say it's such a special moment to be invited to be part of a citizen assembly. And first, people, when they see the invitation, they think it's maybe just a spam or something like this, and they wonder, what is this? And then they realize, oh, this is really an invitation to be a very active part of the democracy. And I think this is a very special thing of a citizen assembly, and that gives the chance to then get into a really deliberative discussion, into a discussion that is very open, that is very argument-based, and not driven by any other things where people look for publicity or things like that. So I think that is really the special thing of citizen assemblies, and that can really help to solve difficult solutions in a democracy. And I completely agree with Peter, what he said, that in a time where we are really challenged in liberal democracies, that is a very good chance to secure liberal democracy, to bring more people into democracy and make them feel how democracy works and make them being part of it. And so I really am much in favor of citizen assemblies, and I think it's a completely different thing to an enquete commission that you mentioned.
If you see sort of, I mean, as Ms. Plovy has explained, there's already sort of rather concrete ways of including citizen councils in the work of the parliament. Would you see something similar for a national parliament like the Bundestag, or is this something you would see rather on a local or on a state level?
No, I very much hope that we are on a way to make it an instrument that is very common in the Bundestag as well as on other levels in Germany. I think every level is it can be a place to put citizen assemblies into place. And we now started with like 2 citizen assemblies we have on the federal level in Germany. We had the first one on how we can bring more participation into our democracy. That was the first citizen assembly on the federal level. And now we have the second one you mentioned on a very broad question. And I think in Germany, we are now in the phases where we experiment with these kind of citizen assemblies. We see what happens, but they are not really part of very important policy processes on the federal level so far. And I hope that we could make this step too, that we really make them part of decision processes we have on the federal level that are difficult for us. And that would make a difference to the assemblies we had so far, which are very broad and give us some general advice, and where we so far have a lack of reaction from the parliament, I'd say. I mean, the first citizen assembly was an experiment driven by a civil society, and now we have like the report, but we don't really have a reaction from the political side, from the parliament or things like that. And I think we really need a formal process also on the federal level to include citizen assemblies into the decision-making processes. And I would hope that we are on a way to get there.
Thank you. That brings me to our last but not least speaker today, which is Helge Lindh. He's with the Social Democrats, also in the German Bundestag, and he's heading a working group within his party group on democracy, and has worked also quite a bit on the issue. I think he's a bit more skeptic or sees more the problems, but maybe he can explain to us in greater detail what he thinks about the approach, where the parliament or where parliamentary democracy could benefit, but also where might be the shortcomings of the whole process. Mr. Lindh.
I think it's a myth that I'm more skeptic, and then to be correct, my party has been a working group on democracy for 150 years now. So I would say if you embrace the instrument of deliberative democracy, you have to see the challenges to be honest with the instrument. And I think the subtitle was the deliberative wave. And from my point of view, we should think in oceans and not in waves, because waves come and go, but we need permanent instruments, and we have to institutionalize it. So Mrs. Christmann already said that we do not have a real parliamentary debate about it. And I think we need it. It was a decision of the president of our parliament and of the Elders Council to install this last Bürgerrat in Germany. But I think we need a broad debate about making it one of the elements on all levels, on the federal level, on the regional level, and on the local level. And then we must talk about the role of the state. Is it something organized by independent organizations, which were very, and still are, very important as a driving force? Or is it the role of the state? So how do we define these roles? Because the great reports showed and the studies show that the design is very important. The design of such instruments of deliberative democracy. And you said I'm a skeptic. I'm not skeptic at all in general, but I'm skeptic about some of the designs. I think we need it as a very important instrument for inclusion and to make those who are non-participants or who are less participating to regular participants. And it's not an instrument to strengthen the participation of those who are very well included, because there is, of course, we all know the danger, including the even included and excluding the excluded even more. And that would not be smart, but it's a great chance to include people who do not take part in the regular political process, who do not vote, who would never take part in a political debate of a party, you would never take an invitation or something like that. So I think we have to see the importance of the design. We have to make an accent on inclusion. And my idea was it is allowed to debate about the quality of a randomized process on representativeness. From my point of view, it depends on the level and on the question, on the issue. It is allowed to give the inclusiveness more importance than the representativeness to reach these goals I described. And this is my social aspect, which seems for me quite important, to use the potential, because we have an enormous problem as well in Germany that a growing number of people think that they have no voice and that they are not included in the political process. And deliberative democracy is something to heal this problem, and it's also something to heal our growing inability to argue and to debate.
Thank you very much. I think you're picking up on some points Madame Plovy was making in the selection process she has described for the Brussels initiative. But I would like to take this question to Peter and Claudia. If you take this criteria of representativeness versus inclusiveness, how would you set up the process that you can really fulfill, ideally, at least the inclusive part? I mean, this is not very challenging if you select people at random, or are there any other processes, any other ways of getting to this inclusiveness and bridging the gap where it is the widest probably between citizens and government and politicians? Maybe, I don't know, Claudia, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in first. And actually, I made a very short comment in the chat in response about that, but this gives me a chance to elaborate on that, because personally, I feel that representativeness and inclusion are not necessarily in tension, and on the contrary, they're both principles that are really important, and both of them are part of the OECD's good practice principles. And it even goes back to the point actually Mr. Lindh was making about the importance of having, you know, a good design, because the design ends up having huge implications actually on all of these more normative concerns about the democratic quality and nature and the inclusiveness and so on. So, I mean, from the evidence that we have, we know that if the random selection process is really conducted in a way that is fair, in the sense that you're kind of, I guess, meeting that principle that technically everybody has an equal chance of being chosen in the first place. But then in addition to that, the process is really truly meaningful and connected to some form of authority, where it's really clear to people when they're invited, you know, what change can this potentially have? You know, if you receive an invitation in the post signed by a minister, signed by a mayor, signed by someone who actually has a position of authority, who's explaining that, you know, after X amount of weekends, they're going to be listening to these recommendations and they'll have an influence on a parliamentary debate or on a bill or on a piece of regulation, etc., then people also have a sense that, oh, actually, like, this is quite important and it's worth taking the time to do that. So that breaks down one of the barriers to participation. And then quite often, I mean, what we encourage actually within the OECD's good practice principles as well, and this is a common practice, is also to either pay a form of honorarium to provide childcare or other caring costs or facilities, to cover transport costs, you know, basically trying to do all of those things that would also prevent people from being able to participate in the first place, and trying to find that balance where that doesn't become the incentive in itself for the participation, but that it's not preventing some people from being able to make it into the room in the first place. But I think it's really, I mean, these are important questions, and it's quite right to be concerned about them.
Peter, how do you address those problems in Canada with your projects?
Well, at this point in Canada, you know, we've sent a letter to about 1 in 65 households. So hundreds of thousands of pieces of mail have gone out. And, you know, I'm happy to report to you that in terms of the diversity of participation that results, you know, it is absolutely aligned with the demographics of our country. And that's actually, I mean, That's the purpose and that's the feature of a good sortition or a civic lottery process. I think it's important that we always question the assumptions that are maybe lurking behind the scenes when we think about who are those people who would like to come out for a Saturday or participate in a deliberative process. Our experience shows us that people from every conceivable walk of life, for all kinds of heterodox reasons, are willing to participate. It may be a newcomer to Canada who simply wants a chance to give something back. It may be somebody who had a beloved uncle who worked on the public transit system, and this was a way of connecting with his legacy. It may be because they've had a terrible experience with the health system, and here's a letter saying they've got an opportunity to influence its future. So there are so many different, very micro, very specific rationales. I think it's also worth remembering that this is an opportunity for the state to demonstrate, a better way, or really of living up to people's expectations. And it's why when we're running these processes, we think about ourselves as a kind of civic concierge service. We're trying to put the best possible face on government. And that means being really proactive about identifying the concerns, the resources, the supports that individuals are going to need in order to be able to play the role that we're asking of them, to treat them and esteem them with the dignity that we afford our elected representatives. And that leveling up of people, of course, leads to very significant dividends, not only through the process, but then later in their own lives as they then report an expanded sense of their own capacity as individuals who could volunteer within their communities or make other kinds of contributions. The last thing I'll say about this is one of the things that we're interested in is developing what we call the service ballot. So at the time of an election, yes, you go in and you mark who you're going to vote for, but maybe you also mark a second ballot that says, yes, you would be interested in serving in some sort of public process, and here are some of the topics that you might be most interested in. Ultimately, as we scale these up, it will become cost prohibitive to constantly be sending separate envelopes to citizens for every issue. And so what we can think about doing is building pools of hundreds of thousands or millions of citizens who have already put up their hand and said they want a chance to play a bigger role.
Just to follow up on this, do you think that this is enough to reach out to those part of the population which are, have the largest distance to the political sphere? I mean, I think what you're suggesting looks, I think it sounds great. And it sounds encouraging that you can attract people, and also the fact that you receive a letter in the mail from a minister is certainly something which can be considered recognition. But I think Mr. Lind's point, but maybe he can follow up on it himself, is how do we reach out to those who are the least represented in the system today? Is this a tool which would help us in this regard as well? Sorry to insist a little bit on that point, but I think it's rather important.
And very briefly, I think it can. I mean, we've paid close attention to the sort of equity effects of these processes. And while I say kind of broad strokes, we send out 10,000 letters to randomly selected households, and it's worth remembering that geography is such a strong proxy for socioeconomic status, about one's ethnicity. That itself is a very powerful filter for reaching into communities who themselves often feel excluded. And we've watched the response rates to see that they're more or less comparable. But you could immediately say, well, what about somebody who doesn't speak English? What about somebody who doesn't have a fixed address? And in various processes, we've worked with community agencies in order to see that people who might be less advantaged in receiving a letter have an opportunity to participate either directly or indirectly in the process. These are things that we can address, I think, through very thoughtful and intentional mechanisms that supplement the lottery. But the point that I would make is that if you line up the membership of a citizens' assembly and you look at the participation or the membership of a legislature or parliament, you are going to be leagues ahead in terms of the diversity of that assembly versus those who are elected. And I think we need to always be remembering that that's the measure against which we should be evaluating these processes. We can't let perfection be the enemy of the good.
Ms. Christmann, coming back to you, would you agree with this? Or is, I mean, you are also, I think the Greens has been a party which is always trying to bring more diversity into Parliament. So is the Citizen Council second best, or maybe a complement in bringing more diversity into the political sphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important point that Peter made, that we shouldn't have the expectation to this Citizens' Assembly to be perfect in every way, but we should compare it to what we have so far, which are representative processes with legislators and parliaments, where we don't have 50% women, for example, where we don't have people from working class, where we don't have this diversity that we now want to have in a perfect way in a Citizens' Assembly. So I think we should really manage our expectations here and see that the diversity in these assemblies is much better than in a parliament, and that we reach many people that we haven't reached so far with other processes, and that maybe don't even vote, that maybe haven't been in a political debate ever before, but that who make this experience for the first time in such a Citizens' Assembly, and that can encourage them to be much more engaged in the future than they have been before. That is what I hear from some participants in assemblies we had in Germany, that they say it was such a great experience that they now want to be part of the political decision-making process, and that they want to get engaged in their local politics, that they maybe want to be try to get in a local parliament, things like that. So we really can reach people that haven't been involved in politics before, but that feel encouraged by having participated in such a Citizens' Assembly. And I think that is a very good chance that we should also try this. And of course, we don't reach like the whole society. We don't reach like all people in a state with such instruments. It's always a very small number, but they talk about their experience with other people, and others, citizens, they can see, oh, it could be me. It could be me that sits in this assembly, and that makes it much less like only the elites that's sitting there and making decisions, but it's like everyone can be part of the decision-making process. And I think that makes a difference in how people experience democracy. So I think that is a really great tool. And of course, the setting is important. And of course, the rules are important, how we can start a Citizens' Assembly. But I think there are many, many good arguments that it's a really good way to involve more people into politics.
But I would like to give Mr. Lindh the possibility to react to this. Are you convinced? Are you satisfied? Is this what we need, or there's still something missing from your perspective?
Well, my approach is different, but it's of course we have different ideological backgrounds, and it's good that we have, because it's a richness of our democracy that we do not have all the same ideological backgrounds. So my target is, of course, to reach ideally all people, and that's why I don't think we need these councils as a solution for exclusion, not at all. But I think we should be very careful and see the potential in the design, and to look at the conditions. How do we organize it, and who do people deny to cooperate? Because if they do it voluntarily, what are the reasons to say, yes, I will participate, or they say no, because they are usually they are not forced to participate. And of course, because of different social backgrounds, people are more or less involved, more or less active. It's I think it's not just neutral, and even in such a process, you have different resources, and you have to find instruments to make those who are usually more silent, who do not trust in themselves, to be willing to participate and to speak loudly. That's one point. And the other point is, I think we should see the combination of the tools, the combination of deliberative instruments, tools, and the representative democracy, and even a referendum. And the whole art, the whole combination is interesting. And I think we must talk about the results. If we have recommendation from the council, what is the way of making this recommendation part of the parliamentary system? We need liability, we need reliability, we need transparency, and I think certain constitutional ways and instruments to force the parliament to show how it deals with these recommendations, because it depends on this method, on these institutions, to make it really every day, so to speak, tool of our democracy. And the purpose should not be weakening the representative democracy, but strengthening. So it's a co-evolution. And even I think it's a strong debate, but my party is still thinking about the idea of referendum. But the ways, I think it would be smart to combine referendum in certain moments with certain issues with these deliberative instruments. And on the last point, we could be, if we are brave, take very dramatic issues, very conflict issues like migration or all questions, to use these tools to stimulate debate in the whole society. And I think it's just 20 or 30 or 40 councils, but if you create a climate, a culture of deliberation, this is the very interesting effect. And I think we need it. And this cultural effect, not just the single council, the single assembly, but the effect on the whole society is maybe the most attractive thing about this instrument.
Claudia, do you also see the referendum as part of the sort of the whole process, or is it as important as Ms. Plavie is describing it from your perspective, from the analysis you've been doing throughout the OECD countries?
I think this is a kind of more nuanced question that I don't think I'll do it justice in the minute that's left, but to give some thoughts on the on the issue, because I mean, I guess the kind of logic and principles within a referendum are somewhat at odds to those within a deliberative process. I mean, within a deliberative process here, you're really trying to bring kind of a broad cross-section of society together, to give them the time and the resources to consider the complexities of the issue, to find some common ground, and to not come to some sort of binary yes or no or other view on the issue, but to actually come up with some more complex recommendations. Whereas in referendums, usually these complex issues end up getting boiled down to what can be binary in that form of direct democracy. So you have a bit of a tension between those two things. I mean, I think that in some cases where there's just, I mean, like in Ireland, for instance, because that's the example we're talking about, first of all, it's a requirement to have a referendum to change the constitution. So in those kind of situations, and I think also where there's just been so much partisan deadlock within the parliament, then a referendum can help to overcome that. And I think what Peter was saying early on about Ireland, actually also that being a bit of a consolidation mobilization of public opinion through the referendum process, it can be a really powerful moment. I also think that there can be a nice complement between deliberative democracy and referendums in a different model, which we also talk about in the report, but we didn't go into the details of it during the event here, but it's called the Citizens Initiative Review. So this is something that originated in Oregon in the United States and has been picked up in other states, but also in Finland and in Switzerland recently, where before a referendum takes place, there's this randomly selected group of people that has an opportunity to deliberate for usually at least 4 days, to hear from experts, to consider the evidence, and they put together a list of the strongest arguments for and against both sides of the issue, which then gets circulated to all of the voters with their ballot paper. So it's a way for them to be able to also have a more considered reflection before going to vote. So I think that that kind of model has some merits to it and is really interesting to explore as well.
Thank you. I think I will, given time, we will probably take this as a sort of a summarizing remark, which is also integrating the deliberative part into more sort of the decision-making part. I would like to thank all our panelists today, Claudia, Peter, Anna Christmann, Helge Lindh, and Marie Plovy for their interventions, for their contributions. I would like to thank all of you for participating very lively in the chat. I hope this event has brought sort of some light, some more initiatives into some more ideas into the debate here in Germany. And I learned a lot from the interventions, from the discussion. I hope you did as well. I would like to thank you again for your participation, your attention, the good discussion, and wish you all a great evening. And thanks again, and see you very soon at one of our next events.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.